I passed simulation 2 with a 96%, and that's without studying too much, without paying attention, and in only 1 week. Quick note, if you are struggling with the course, you can check out my real estate group sessions below. Okay, so as an intro for the simulation sessions, you're going to see a lot of repetition from other courses and from the last simulation session. This means stuff from simulation 1, course 3, and course 4 especially. You're going to see a lot of concepts come up again and again. 2, for me, the simulations were very long and slow. I could easily see them doing these simulation sessions and teaching the entire content within like just a few hours, but instead they wanted to do 8 hours for 5 consecutive days, which I thought was a bit extensive, a bit too much, but it really depends person to person. I much would have rather preferred just to have kept it short, kind of just gone in and gone out, get the simulation done. But you know, a lot of people do enjoy the simulations. So if you feel like you want to get a more hands-on real life grasp of the course, kind of how it's going to affect real life, then simulations are actually quite good in that aspect. Keep in mind, for me, I also took my simulation exam online. And so what this means is that I did all of my online simulation sessions with the group and the instructor online, like over Zoom. And then I also did my exam online. It's a much faster and easier process because you don't have to drive somewhere every day. You just have to join a meeting on any device. And you can also zone in, zone out. You don't really have to be fully there. Where if you want a more kind of real practical experience, hands-on experience, then of course the in-person simulation sessions are going to be better for that. That means you're going to be with a group, you're in person, you get to talk with real people, and of course it's a lot more fun, I'm sure. But again, if you're just trying to get in and out and get the simulation sessions done, then that is what I did, and I simply just did it online. Okay, number 3, you're going to have math questions. Now, for these math questions, they're going to be a little bit more hard than Sims 1 or than the other courses. And so you've got to make sure that you pay attention in class when they are taking up these math questions. And you're going to find the exam questions are going to be very, very similar. So the more you pay attention in class, the more you're actually going to be successful on the exam itself. Keep in mind as well that these exam questions, especially the math ones, are going to be paragraph long questions. So for the math questions, usually the hardest parts is just reading the paragraph, identifying the information you need, and then putting that information into the formula that hopefully you remember for whatever question they're asking you. Okay, and last thing before we get started is the booklet. You're going to get a booklet from the simulation sessions, and the booklet is your Bible. I'm telling you, it is going to have everything that you're going to need for the exam. So if you're ever looking for some kind of short notes or summary pages, really, the booklet is not that long, and that should be the only thing you study, more or less. Almost every kind of activity you do is in that book. All the answers are in that book. Of course, there's a lot of fill in the blank parts, which we'll talk about later, but use that booklet as much as possible. Okay, now on to the tips. The very first tip I have for you for the simulation session 2 is use the performance checklist wisely. Okay, the performance checklist looks something like this. Now, they are basically the answer sheet to a lot of the real life scenarios you'll be doing in the simulation sessions. And so essentially what happens in these sessions is you basically role play with other people, different scenarios that they give you so that you can kind of imitate how it would be in real life. This might be situations from working with a buyer, working with a seller, working with an inspector or a lawyer or mortgage agent. There's a lot of different scenarios. Many of them deal with client-facing situations, and simply it's a matter of like asking questions, them asking you other questions, and you just kind of trying to think on your feet and remember the stuff that you actually need to get that scenario done, or that information that you need for that scenario. Now, for me personally, truth is I didn't really participate as much as I maybe should have, but at the same time, I really just focused on scenarios where I actually thought were important for the exam, because even though these give you a snippet of real life, truth is still in real life, it is totally different. So they do help a little bit with, you know, getting a little bit anxious when you're talking to clients, but a big part of that training is just going to happen when you actually get into the field, you get into a brokerage, and you start actually practicing stuff. So in terms of just passing the exam itself, if you just want a buzz line to how do I get through this exam, pretty much some scenarios are important, some are not. It's going to be a matter of picking and choosing. And my fast forward strategy to this is sometimes I wouldn't really participate in the scenarios, but I would review the performance checklist. And like I said, the performance checklist has all the answers for that specific scenario. And so what that means is if you're doing any kind of scenario, let's say you're not paying attention, you kind of forgot what you're supposed to be doing, even if you kind of botch that exercise, After, from the booklet, review the performance checklist, check out the answers, and you're going to be completely fine. Trust me, it is absolutely the best cheat sheet you can have. And as long as you know everything on that checklist and you can remember for your exam, then you'll be totally okay. Okay, this leads me to my next point, which is the short answer questions. Now, throughout the booklet, you're going to find a lot of different exercises, a lot of performance checklists, but you're also going to find a lot of short answer questions. Now, these short answer questions are pretty much like fill in the blank, short, like a couple of lines, fill in the blanks, where they'll give you a question, you got to answer that question, and then eventually they will give you the real answer, and you got to take notes or erase your answer. So for me, it kind of beat the purpose a little bit. I simply wanted to get straight to the answer directly. And it's kind of like if I had notes that was already completed for me versus notes where I had to fill in the blank. Although fill in the blank can be useful, especially for remembering it for your brain, not saying it isn't useful, I sometimes just prefer having the notes directly so that I can study it on my own time. And I don't have to do this exercise because personally, I know what ways I study best, and I would much rather kind of just do it on my own time. So in that scenario, a lot of times you're going to have a question, they're going to give you a few minutes to fill in that short answer question, and then they're going to tell you the real answer where you erase whatever you wrote and write the real one. And so what I did was I would just either wait until they gave me the real answer, or I would pretty much just think of a few things in my head, maybe write something small down, and then just wait till they gave me the real answer again. And like I said, you can still pass this exam with a 96% without participating as long as you're using the booklet to the full extreme, which means writing down all of those short answer question answers. You're going to need those absolutely, and writing down or any kind of additional notes for those performance checklists. For the most part, those performance checklists are complete, but you might have additional notes that you might write down. But the short answer questions, they're blank. And so it is totally up to you to write down as much information from the answer sheet from the instructor when they take it up with the class. It's totally up to you to write all that information down. And I guarantee you the exam is very, very similar to the stuff you're going to be doing in the simulation sessions. So the performance checklist and the short answer questions are that much more important. The more that you're able to study from that booklet and the more complete your booklet is, the better you're going to do in the exam. It's almost a direct correlation. And like I said, I found it just took me less time to study on my own than to study with a class. Like I would just fill in the blanks. I wouldn't really pay too much attention, but then after class, I would review 1 to 2 hours. This was way easier for me than waiting an hour to just complete, an exercise or staying focused the entire 8-hour day, which is, obviously very, very difficult. Okay, now this leads me to my third point, which is selective focus or selective attention. Now, like I've been saying a lot again and again, like the simulation sessions are very long. And it's not to say that they're not fun, and that I'm sure the in-person sessions would have been more fun as well. But if you are just trying to get a beeline to just do the exam in the least effort possible, then selective focus is the way to go. This is where you don't actually have to pay attention for the entire day. And I certainly didn't. It's almost impossible to stay focused for the whole 8-hour simulation days, 5 consecutive days in a row. And so what I would do is I would zone in and I would zone out, but I would make sure that I'm zoning into moments that are the most important for me. And those moments happen to be 1, taking up exercises, and 2, when people are asking questions. Both of those moments are extremely valuable for your exam. When you take up exercises, like I said, you've got to write down all of the answers, all of the notes, everything that people say, make sure you listen in on it, because that's going to be very important. And a lot of times, students will ask questions that are maybe not exactly on the booklet, and the instructor will give you a little bit of a niblet of what you're going to see on the exam. They're going to tell you, oh, that's a great question. On the exam, you might be seeing something similar. And a lot of times, they're going to be very, very obvious about what is going to be on the exam and what is not. And so make sure you're paying attention to taking up those exercises. And like I said, pay attention to the questions. When people ask questions, that's where you can get out more information from the instructor who already pretty much know what you're going to see on the exam. They often have not seen the exam, but they've seen other ones before. And so they will have a very good idea. And they're not too strict. They're not trying to safeguard or hold information that most of the time. So the more and the better questions you or your peers ask, the more information you're going to get from them. and the better prepared you're going to be for your exam. Now, there are also going to be tons of role plays and self-reflections, which are littered throughout the booklet. Again, not that important for your exam. Might be fun, but that is totally up to you. Okay, now this leads me to the last point number 4, which is the after-class tips. Now, this should be fairly simple. So your after-class strategy should consist of 1, reviewing the notes and the performance checklists, 2, doing active recall, and 3, studying the math. All 3 of those things are extremely important. Now, active recall is something I've covered in another video, so I won't go too much depth into it, but more or less, it is looking at your notes and trying to explain certain concepts out loud in your own words in many, many different ways. By doing this, you're going to get a better understanding of those concepts, and your brain is going to get much better at recalling information. And so once you're able to explain something in your own words, you can explain it to anybody, and you're going to be much better at the application-based questions, which come up a lot on Simulation 2. As for the math, you are going to get a few math questions. Now, the math questions are not necessarily difficult, but they can be if you don't study, and they are also much harder if you do your exam online. Again, it's not impossible. I personally did my simulation session online, and I did the math, and it was a little bit of a pain in the ass, but I did okay. Now, I would totally recommend that you do your simulation exam in person because of the math, because when they give you 3 to 4 math questions, and you have to bring out a formula, you have to calculate some numbers, you need a piece of paper. It's very difficult to do it mentally, and hence it's very difficult to do it online because you're not allowed any kind of paper or any kind of physical calculator. You have to do it on the online calculator, and you kind of got to do it in your head. So in-person exams, much, much easier, much, much better, and you can get a piece of paper, you can write all your stuff down, you get a physical calculator, and pretty much that's the dream for your exam. As long as you know your formula, as long as you're reading the question right, then you're going to be totally okay for those math questions. Now, the math for the simulation sessions revolve around rent and income. Most of the time, you're going to be asked to calculate rent based on square footage, and you're going to need to know when to include vacant units and expenses to find gross income and net income. So all of these things are very, very important for your exam, and these are things that you're going to discuss with the instructor during the simulation session. So if they don't make sense, if you don't understand how they interrelate to each other, ask questions. Trust me, you have lots of times in the sim sessions, and don't be afraid to ask questions because most people don't care, or most people will have a similar question. Okay, hopefully that helped a little bit with the simulation sessions. Drop a comment if you want me to cover anything else, like any of the math or something specific. And of course, like and subscribe if you thought that this video helped you. Okay, best of luck and good luck with simulation sessions.